Hello, everyone. I'm Brooks Raiford, President and CEO of NC Tech, and welcome to this live briefing on the release of our quarterly leadership poll. In the early months of COVID, during the spring and summer of 2020, we did some polling to take the pulse of leaders in the tech sector about how COVID was impacting their organizations and get a sense of their expectations for the near term. The results proved of great interest to our members and to the media. So starting in 2022, we launched a quarterly poll that asks some consistent questions about general business sentiment, like on hiring, growth plans, as well as some questions that might rotate in or out based on current events or issues. The first quarterly poll for 2023 was conducted within the last week, and we are releasing that today. You'll find this on our website a little bit later this morning at nctech.org/pulse. We polled about 400 people and had about a 47% response rate, which is great. The respondents are members of our board of directors, board of advisors, tech CEOs, and leaders of large tech hubs or sites within North Carolina. Our sponsor from the inception of these polls has been the Stearns Financial Group. Their founder, Dennis Stearns, serves on the board of advisors for NC Tech and is very engaged with us. And Dennis joins me today. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you, Brooks.
Glad to have you. We'll invite your comments kind of as we move our way through. And our friend Alex is going to advance slides. So if you'll move to the first slide. We ask a few demographic questions first, just so everyone has a flavor of who responded. And so we ask about what best depicts the number of North Carolina-based employees in your organization. And you'll see that the distribution is fairly similar in the small, medium, and larger segments there. And then as you get even larger, it gets smaller. It's worth noting that NC Tech as an organization has about 600 members. And the vast majority of those members have fewer than 50 employees in North Carolina. So we actually skew small and medium-sized businesses. But as you can see here, the respondents to this poll, mainly because the audience that's polled tends to skew more mid-sized and larger. Next slide. We ask if your organization is headquartered in North Carolina, and this actually does mimic our membership base. About 2/3 of our members are headquartered in North Carolina, and that's reflected here in the responses. Next. We ask about the role of the respondent, and you can see it's very heavily C-suite. So leadership, it moves on down from there in various functional roles. Next. So we ask, how do you perceive this past quarter has been for North Carolina's technology sector broadly, the sector? And we offer terrible, slightly disappointing, okay, good, and great. And this question is consistent. So I look back at the last time this question was asked, which was the fourth quarter of 2022. And what we see is that slightly disappointing went up 3 points. Okay went up 18 points. Good went down 13 points. And great went down 9 points. So clearly the respondents felt like the sector at large shifted a bit toward moderate to good versus good to great. So that's worth noting. Dennis, did you have any observations there?
Well, I think that as we've been doing these surveys, we've noticed that the tech sector in general had been doing better than maybe the general economy. I was with a group of private CEOs in Raleigh last week, and the consensus was that, they're still worried about a mild recession or something slowing in the economy, and the tech sector, based on these surveys, indicate that maybe the tech sector is seeing some of that slowdown as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, the next slide, if you go to that, Alex, sort of ties in here. How has the past quarter been for your organization specifically? So remember, the previous question was, what's your perception of how the sector has done? Now, how did your organization do? What we saw here was that slightly disappointing went up 6 points from a quarter ago. Those who said okay were about the same. Those who said good went down 3. And those that said great went down 3. So not a lot of shift on this one, but what this shows is people think their own organization is doing better than they think the sector is doing. So I think the media and the press reports and the general concerns that are out there are impacting people's views of the broader sector. But when they're asked about their own organization, which they of course know well, the numbers are better. So that's encouraging. Dennis, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The IT spend, and depending on where a company is in the supply chain, can mean whether they're seeing some of the slowdown or not. But it was interesting in this meeting I was in Raleigh, the consensus was, if they're throwing a recession in the country, why don't we all not participate as much as possible? I don't know that that's completely possible, but they talked about a number of things to try to make sure that the disruption going on in the tech sector, the chat GPTs and all the things that are happening, that they catch the tailwind, not the headwind as much.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide. This is forward looking. I expect that over the next quarter, again, this is about their own business, will decline, stay the same, or grow. Decline went up 2 points from a quarter ago. Stay the same went down 15, but grow went up 13. Think about that. So actually optimism has increased notably about people's own organizations since the last quarter. So again, this feeds the narrative that there might be a general perception that there's troubles out there or concerns out there about the sector that give people some caution when talking about the sector. When they're talking about their own organization, not only are they optimistic, they're actually more so than last quarter. So Dennis, what do you think about that?
Well, and this is very optimistic for the tech sector, because the non-tech sector is not as optimistic as what you're seeing on the screen.
Very true. We certainly see that. I will say, just some side notes here, the unemployment rate nationally remains quite low, near historical lows. The tech unemployment rate is half of that and remains half of that. There's been some studies recently, the Wall Street Journal quoted some that noted that people in the tech sector who lose their job through a layoff are finding another job on par or better than the one they had from a comp standpoint within 3 months, usually in less than 1 month. So I think there's the optimism that is there is underpinned by some of that type of experience as well.
Well, and for those who are listening who are employees, that's heartening. For those who are employers, that potentially is frightening.
Very true. That's right. Okay, let's move to the next. We always ask a hiring question. So we ask, is your organization reducing its headcount, not hiring, or hiring? I will say that the phraseology of this question shifted, and I don't know that I thought it would be a big deal, and it may not be. But when I explain what happened since last time, it might have been. The previous quarter, the question was, are you reducing headcount / laying off? Are you freezing hiring, which implies a policy, you're frozen hiring. And then are you still hiring? The phraseology this time was not hiring, which might not be a policy. It just may be there's no real net gain going on, and we're pausing things at the moment. So I don't know if that nuance makes a difference in how people answered. But if you look at the changes, headcount reduction remained the same, exactly 2.2% before, and still that case now. Not hiring went up 16 points, again, from the question being phrased frozen hiring. But hopefully that people took that the same way. And then hiring went down 19 points. So the shift went from hiring to not hiring. Fortunately, there was no shift to reduction. Reduction. That stayed the same. Dennis, what are your thoughts there?
Well, so I think back, Brooks, to comments you made last quarter and the quarter before that if everybody believes a recession is coming and they start not hiring or trimming headcount or delaying projects or trimming marketing, you actually could get a recession. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And some of some of these statistics and some of the other ones we've seen suggest that that is still a very real possibility.
Well, certainly we have talked before in these sessions and in other places about how true it is that economic activity and performance is very psychologically driven. Consumer and business confidence and where that lies obviously impacts behavior, which impacts results, and it's just one of those cycles. So we'll see how that materializes.
Yeah, it's a good thing we didn't have anything major happen, like a major technology bank have problems in the last month. Speaking of confidence.
We had a question in the Q&A that I thought was interesting. You mentioned ChatGPT earlier. The question is, do you think the surge in AI creates more optimism in the tech sector than, say, perhaps other sectors? There's been a lot of articles lately about 80% of all jobs will be impacted, not to say eliminated, but impacted by AI, in some cases in a tremendously positive way. And it's very early in this whole generative AI world that we're in. So I don't think anyone really knows the answer. There are some who probably have a better sense of what the potential is, where this could be hugely impactful. I don't know how expert you are in that, Dennis, or well-read or have some opinions about it, but I welcome your thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, we've been hearing a lot about it, both within the tech sector and non-tech. And no question that the future is arriving faster than maybe some wanted it to. One of the interesting things that one of the companies in that meeting in Raleigh that I was at was talking about is they had gone to their employees and offered $10,000 bonuses for the best ways to use ChatGPT to improve the productivity of their company. So there are some companies that are trying to get this wind in their sails, but the other thing that we're hearing a lot is maybe more employees than employers are nervous about some of these trends, and they keep saying, okay, I hear copywriters may be in trouble. Is my job in jeopardy?
Well, I have an anecdote to share with you about this. A couple of weeks ago, I decided to give it a trial run, ChatGPT specifically, and I typed in two questions. The first one was, tell me about the North Carolina Technology Association. And it gave an answer that was very on target. And I thought to myself, well, our own website has some pretty good some pretty good paragraphs about that. And so it didn't surprise me that it sort of pulled that language pretty in a straightforward way. And then I said, tell me about Brooks Raiford. And it had some elements of truth to it, but it had me as having founded a couple of companies that I'd never heard of. It had me on boards I've never been on. It gave me degrees from institutions I'd never attended. And yet it had some general comments that you could see were accurate or on track. I waited 2 weeks and asked the same questions. The answer about tell me about the Tech Association was pretty much the same. The one about tell me about me had a very similar flow to it, but an entirely new set of founded companies and institutions from which I had degrees and boards that I've served on. So it's in its infancy, and there's work to be done, of course, to for a user to have confidence in the output. And I think that's what's going to prevent too much early usage of it in ways that are nefarious, because it'd be too easy to spot that things are kind of not quite right.
Well, and that's an interesting story, Brooks. No question that ChatGPT and some of the other entities in the AI space hallucinate at times, and obviously they hallucinated about you. The interesting thing, a fairly major corporate attorney who their firm is a member of NC Tech had been given a project. They went out, researched the project, came back to their client and gave them the results. And the client said, well, that's about what ChatGPT told us. Well, yeah. You can imagine that was a chilling moment for that corporate attorney who charged right much for the advice. So again, probably not ready for prime time in many areas, but coming faster than we may all think.
I'm sure that's true, and I believe the anecdote we've heard, speaking of attorneys, is that the Chat GPT aced the LSAT, so or the bar exam. All right, let's move on. Next slide. So these last two slides are open-ended questions. We try to give people a little room here to just say what they're thinking and pull out some of the phrases or terms that stood out in terms of frequency of inclusion. So what makes you optimistic about the next 12 months? And you can see here some of the examples. We talked actually a little, sort of touched on this: resiliency of the NC Tech ecosystem, people feeling like interest rates and inflation are trending downward and expect that to hopefully happen over the next 12 months. Some degree of normalization after COVID. And I won't read them all, but you can see here what people's thoughts were about what they're excited about or optimistic about. If you move to the next slide. So what concerns you, if anything, about the next 12 months? And then some of these are opposite: rising interest rates or inflation, some worry about. Tech layoffs, we talked about that earlier. Global instability, political climate, et cetera. Lack of venture capital, that certainly has diminished in the last 12 months. Been in some interviews about Silicon Valley Bank and the outcome there, and some other impacts around banks that were innovation focused, and the drying up of venture funds or the pausing of that in a number of ways certainly was a factor. So you can see some of the other instability in the financial sector ties into that as well. So Dennis, I'll pause before we close and ask what resonates with you about what people are optimistic about or what they're concerned about.
Well, the things that we just looked at very much mirror recent surveys we've done of private company CEOs and public company CEOs. And so I don't think the tech sector is necessarily unique in having some of these issues, but in some cases, the tech sector, again, technology is the future in the fourth techno-industrial revolution. So in some cases, I think that trying to figure out how to put the wind in the sails and be able to continue to lean into that trend is a great thing. The piece, again, that I find key, this finding enough talent for the employment needs skills gap, attracting and competing for talent, that war for talent is just heating up, and it's been pretty hot, and it continues to be an issue for a lot of companies.
It is. We continue to hear that. The news about large brand name tech companies who are having layoffs of several thousands of people are certainly headline grabbing. Some of those very companies hasten to add that they are also hiring in other areas where they're growing as a business or have focus. But we're also seeing the tech demand and tech hiring in non-tech companies continuing to be strong. We publish at the Tech Association a monthly IT job trends report. It's a snapshot type page, and one of the snapshots on that page is top 10 hirers of tech talent. And in the most recent month, the number of tech job openings dipped, but 8 of 10 of the top 10 hirers of tech talent in North Carolina were not tech companies. So I just gave a presentation earlier this week to the legislature about the state of the tech sector, and was sharing with them that the number of tech workers in North Carolina exceeds the number of employees who work for tech companies, because tech companies obviously employ people who are not tech, and non-tech companies, which are the majority, hire lots of tech people. So it's an interesting distinction, and most of the hiring for tech talent is outside of the traditional tech company arena. Well, Dennis, thank you very much for joining me for this and for supporting this polling series. That wraps up the results. I really appreciate Stearns Financial Group underwriting this effort. I want to remind everyone that you can find this recording and the poll results on our website at nctech.org/pulse soon after we exit this recording today. So for now, thanks for viewing, and we will see you next time.